Hi, Chapter 11, Effective Learning Environments. There are four main factors with creating these environments, and those are time management, the essence of actually creating the environment itself, your classroom management, and discipline. And with time management, there are factors that disrupt the classroom, and those would be school functions, standardized testing, field trips, and non-instructional activities like assemblies and fire drills. And then also another big thing is that teachers can either start or finish early or start late, and that causes the students to lose valuable learning time because they aren't going to stay in the classroom for the allotted time, and that is very, very little with the time that they have already. So that, number one, hinders the student's ability to learn the information with the allotted time. And then secondly, the interruptions. Interruptions themselves break the momentum of the classroom, they reduce the students' attention of the task, and they provide a disruption for class to go off course. So teachers, they need to learn how to postpone dealing with interruptions, like put a box on the door or ask teachers not to send them anything until like during breaks or on their lunch period, or do things after school. In some situations that can't always happen because there are things that need immediate attention, but for the most part, if it's not of high importance or it's not on a timeline, more often than not it can wait, and letting it wait benefits the classroom because you're not distracting your students by your actions. And then another factor is routine procedures. These are things that are done in the classroom that usually are done by the teacher, but if the students do them, it sets a routine of the classroom, and it also gives the teacher more time to prepare or to discuss the topics at hand in the lesson, so they have more time to cover the material effectively and not leave anything out. And another factor is discipline. Dealing with discipline is a big issue in the classroom because if a teacher has to stop class because of another student's actions, that pretty much just breaks the whole momentum right there. So ideally, if a student is disrupting or misbehaving, that is where a teacher would use the overlapping skills, where they can go and either close a book if somebody's reading in class that's not dealing with the class, or someone's talking and the teacher gives them a warning glance. Those are things that teachers can do to deal with disciplinary problems in the classroom without disrupting the class. And whenever you're creating your effective learning environment, you have to keep in mind of the engaged time, and that is the time students actually spend learning the assigned work or lessons. And with your lessons, you want to be very creative, because if you don't spark the students' interest, they aren't going to want to sit there and listen to the assignment, number one, and they aren't going to pay attention. So if you just while I want to talk about the topic instead of presenting it in an eye-catching way, or just talk about it monotonely to where it just sounds like you're just droning on and on and on, they're not going to pay attention to you, and they're not going to learn what they need to, because their attention span's already gone because they don't want to listen. So being creative definitely helps in your presentation and engaging your students. And then also transitioning, like if you're doing group work or you have your students going from station to station, you need to have it to where the transitions happen all at once, to where students aren't, if group A is ready to move to group B, you need to set a timer for the groups to be at each station. That way group A isn't trying to move to group B's table and group B isn't still working on the stuff. That way everybody can move around and get to everything in a lot of time. And then for the transitions, there are 3 rules. For transitions, you need to give signals. The students need to understand what to do, and the transitions need to be made all at once. So everything's happening at once, so there's not one thing going on here, then another thing going on here. It's all going on at once. Like an example of this would be at the end of class, if there's a minute left, the teacher can say, okay, everybody pack up and line up at the door to get ready to leave. That would be an example of a transition. And then another factor is group focus. In group focus, you need to have oral responses or verbal responses, and you need to avoid activities that do not include the whole group or class, as in individual activities. And then circle the classroom. Whenever you're doing group work in the classroom, the teacher needs to go around table by table or group by group and make sure that the students are staying on task, they understand all the concepts, and they understand exactly what it is the assignment is asking them to do. And another thing is that the teacher should avoid spending too much time at a specific group during group focus, because if you spend too much time on one group or student, then you aren't spending your time at another group or student who actually needs your help. You aren't getting to everybody around in the group in the allotted time. And then another skill that I talked about earlier is overlapping. Overlapping is a necessary skill that teachers need to learn to accommodate themselves to, because this skill, it also helps correcting misbehavior, and it also helps the teachers multitask in the classroom. Like, they can walk around passing out papers and still talking about the assignment or the topic while they're doing this action. And then time on task, there is such a thing as overdoing it. If you overdo time on task, that doesn't mean that you will necessarily increase the learning that's happening in the classroom. It can actually decrease the learning, because if you have it planned out to where every single minute is doing a specific thing, then it just feels like a routine schedule. It doesn't feel like actual learning is taking place. If you have like a set time frame for each activity, it works a lot better, because the students don't feel like they have to do one thing here and one thing there. They feel like they have more time to ask the important questions and to have their questions addressed and discussed appropriately. Another thing is classroom management. In classroom management, you need to have behavior guidelines, which would be clear, specific plans for introducing classroom rules and procedures. If the students don't understand how you run your classroom, or they don't see that you have guidelines for your classroom, it just sets you up for failure, because that just initiates total chaos. Because if they don't see the rules posted, they don't realize that there are consequences, and you also need to follow through with those consequences. If you're going to talk the talk, you have to walk the walk, so to say. And then another thing for classroom management is you need to work and remain involved with the class. You can't just say, okay, this is the assignment, now do it. You need to explain the assignment, you need to explain what it's asking the students to do, answer any questions beforehand, and then say, okay, you have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer this question, and then we'll talk about it after, so that you can see if you're on the right track or not. And you need to spend extra time introducing the rules and procedures too, because like I said earlier, if the students don't understand the rules or the procedures, they aren't going to comply all the way, or it's going to cause a lot of confusion, because they aren't going to understand, and they'll think that they can get away with certain things in the classroom, like misbehavior and things like that. And you need to gradually introduce procedures, because especially starting off in the new school year, it can be overwhelming to students who are trying to get used to different teachers, and every classroom has different ways or similar ways in how they are run. So you need to kind of introduce new rules throughout the first week of the school. To me, that would be ideal, because then you can introduce 1 or 2 rules a day in the classroom, and then by the end of the week the students will learn or be aware of all the classroom rules, instead of just throwing 10 or 15 different rules or setting structures within the first day of school, because it can be very overwhelming for the student and the teacher, because they're just going to feel like all they do is just talk about rules and rules and rules, and they aren't actually spending the first few days of school actually jumping into the course material. and the teachers need to respond immediately to stop misbehavior. Like if a student's talking out of turn or they're causing a big behavior disruption, the teacher can either let them go sit in the hall, send them to the principal's office, or to just remove them from the situation itself as kind of like a timeout. The student needs to be removed from the classroom or removed from the behavior to prevent them from continuing in the misbehavior and to also prevent them from distracting other classmates as well. And then your class rules. There are a few guidelines for creating a class rule. Number one is they need to be few in number, not too many rules. Like I said, it can be very overwhelming for students. They need to make sense, because if students don't understand the rules, they're not going to follow them because they don't know what you're talking about. They also need to be considered fair. You don't want to create rules that are deemed as unfair, because the students aren't going to want to listen to you because they think that you're just hypocritical and you don't have a sense of justice in your classroom, so to say. They need to be clearly explained. Like I said, that it's very important that your students understand the class rules, and they need to be deliberately taught to students. Post them on the wall. Give syllabus handouts for classroom rules every beginning of the school year. They need to know these are the rules and these are the consequences if you break these rules, and this is what's going to happen. Like I said, you have to talk the talk. If you're going to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk in the classroom. And discipline is the last topic. There's a principle of least intervention. That means that you need to either remove the student from the behavior or from the classroom. That way it doesn't disrupt the class as a whole. You need to go for correcting misbehavior. You need to do it in the least interrupting way as possible. That way you don't disrupt the other students from learning and you don't break the momentum of your class. There are prevention and nonverbal cues. Like I said, you can usually give a warning glance or look to a group of students who are talking while you're talking or not paying attention to the topic at hand. Praise of correct behavior that's incompatible with misbehavior. Like, a lot of you turned in your reports, but there's a few of you who need to still turn theirs in. That's still addressing that it needs to be turned in, but it's not specifically naming each student, so because you don't want to pinpoint or isolate the students from the group, because that just causes a whole other onset of problems. And then another way of dealing with discipline is praise for other students. If other children or students see that other people are getting rewarded or praised for their work, then it's going to create an initiative or incentive for them to step up to the plate and to do their work correctly, or to provide better quality of work. You can give verbal reminders, and then these last three things are kind of the guideline for acting upon misbehavior. You give verbal reminders, repeated reminders, and then consequences. The student needs to know, okay, the first time they act out of turn or do something that's not okay in the classroom, that would be an instance where the teacher would give a verbal reminder. And then if they do it again, unconsciously or consciously, that would be another instance where the teacher would repeat the reminder verbally. And the last thing is that if the student continues to habitually pertain to conduct the misbehavior, then that is when the teacher would go ahead and initiate the consequences in the classroom.